On behalf of our Institute of Architecture, I would like to welcome our next guest from Belgium, Laurens Bekemans from BC, which stands for Brussels Cooperation. Laurens graduated as an architect at St. Lucas University in Brussels in 2009, which today is part of KU Leuven. And even before that, means during his studies already in 2006, he, together with Wees de Griff, Ken de Koeman, Nicolas Köckelberg, I'm not so sure about how to pronounce these Flemish names. So together with these three others, he was co-founder of BC Studies. BC Studies provides consultancy on locally sourced materials, organizes workshops for all kinds of people, students, children, architects, but also for clients, and engages in research that goes beyond architectural practice. In 2012, after having worked as a junior architect for Wolfgang Rossbauer in Zurich and for Synergy International in Brussels, he co-founded BC Architects. They realized numerous projects, both in Belgium and also abroad, in Burundi, Afghanistan, Morocco, and other countries of the world. Their projects are typologically and formally quite diverse, but always seemingly simple and strong. Most of the projects use clay, rammed earth, brick, or wood as their main materials. So there's always a certain earth-boundness to, I would say, all of their projects. In 2013, he became lecturer at the KU Leuven, and in 2018, he was co-founder of BC Materials. BC Materials transforms excavated earth of construction sites into building materials. It sounds so simple. Probably in reality it's not, but it's definitely a very intelligent idea. Maybe we hear more about that, I don't know. So it's this trinity of BC Studies, BC Architects, and BC Materials that expresses your broad interest and understanding of our profession. I'm very impressed by the innovative drive of your company towards systemic change, I would say. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and I hope you all enjoy his lecture, both here in the aula but also in Zoom. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Suzanne. I'm sorry I was a bit late today, so I missed quite a few of the previous presentations, which I hope I will be seeing later on. But I was happy to manage to get in while Rotor was giving the lecture, because even if we're based in the same city, in Brussels, I realized I had never seen a kind of full lecture of you, which I was very ashamed of when I was entering. So I could tick that off now. And so thank you very much for the lecture, because I think it was very relevant and very inspiring, as many of you said. So today, what I was thinking of doing is kind of going through a number of key projects which defined what our hybrid office nowadays is: BC Architects, BC Studies, and BC Materials. Because as you could hear what Suzanne was saying, they have not been founded or created at the same moment. It was never for us an idea to have this kind of trinity of three companies, but it has been something that has been grown throughout the years because of the projects we did, and we needed to find ways of doing these projects, because some of them were just not feasible within the structures that an architectural office has at his disposal. And now I should, yes. So we have three entities today. We have BC Architects, which is a company, architectural agency, let's say, with all the, which you would have here, GmbH, if I'm not mistaken. You have BC Studies, which is an association which as Susan also mentioned, focuses on education and research. Education, because an association is au but non lucratif, so there's no gains we're making with that association. And so it's perfectly fitting this kind of idea of whatever has been of content we create, we want to disperse this content, we want to sensibilize. And BC Materials, which is again a different legal structure, which is a cooperative. A cooperative meaning you have different shareholders, but shareholders not in the sense as a kind of GmbH or a company. It's an open cooperative. And so that was the kind of latest structure we set up in order to kind of develop further the materials. We needed to have these three different structures because an architect cannot be a material producer and so on. So we needed the kind of three different entities. So as I said, this is the old presentation. Was the new one placed on it? No. I can go on with this one meanwhile. Okay, let's get on with this one, I would say. If you have troubles finding the new one, I can find my way through this one as well. So let's start with the kind of first key project, which is the Library of Muyinga, which was a project we started right after graduating. We managed to kind of attach ourselves to a project that was being developed in Burundi. And as the four of us, we started this kind of journey. And you have to imagine that we had no clue. I mean, after finishing school, we had very good theoretical and conceptual knowledge, but there was no knowledge on practical level. Entering the country and starting with this project, for us, the first thing we did was trying to understand the materiality of the site. And it started as a kind of detective story, being we had this radius of 5 kilometers, and we kind of looked at all the materials which were at our disposal within that range. We had stones, we had talks with forestry management, we had talks with hunters, how they made their these were sisal cactuses, which were very fibrous and very interesting to use. There were styles, but I think one of the most kind of capturing moments for us during that first kind of project was the realization of the resource which was straightly be under us, which was earth. We had this encounter with this villager who was kind of taking the resource straight out of the earth. And next to it, developing these kind of adobe blocks, sun-dried blocks, which were dried there for approximately, let's say, 2-3 weeks in the sun, and which straight were used within the construction of their homes. It was a very interesting material, as also because it was quite low threshold, but also it could be reused in an eternal time. And between this picture and the previous one, there's 1 year. Because of course we had this kind of understanding of a collection of materials, locally sourced materials. And we were very interested to continue with the materiality of earth. But we didn't have at all any kind of understanding of it to the extent that we could say we can build with it. And we went back. We had this full year in which some of us, well, one of us went to Créteil to do the earth studies in Grenoble. We had a full year of kind of researching and doing workshops and so on. We left then, once we found we were ready, we left back and we went to kind of look further into the material. And it's, when you work with earth, it's quite kind of similar to cooking. It's about proportions, it's about ingredients, and it's about the understanding of the actual earth you have. So these are tests which were done in the first times. There's a kind of sedimentation test, which you saw before, to understand the granulometry of the finest particles. There's the sieving, in which you kind of determine further as well the kind of amount of types of earth you have in your soil. And with this, you're able to kind of develop graphics that you can use to your clients to say, like, look, this is really kind of academic research material. Actually, in the reality, it's a very tactile research. And if we go back to this kind of first study, with that, we could know, okay, we have this type of soil. And this type of soil means for us that there is a kind of technique which is useful to use this soil which we have. The decision was to go further with compressed earth blocks. Reason for it was the need of a machine, so it had a kind of slight mechanization in the process of the block. And we had, initially we thought, okay, we'll make our own machine. On the internet we could find, there's open source site in the US, you could find plans how to make your own machine. It took us 1 month to actually find a similar machine, which was sent in the 80s, just next to the site. So the next step, okay, we have the machine, we made our blocks. We made a matrix, we made a selection of blocks, and then we had to choose which block we could actually use. So we needed to understand how to understand the strength of the block. Again, we went back to YouTube. YouTube is a wonderful platform of teaching. Like there, we found out certain types of machine we could make to test on flexion and pressure. So we did that. And so there we had a kind of, we broke all of our blocks like that. We could understand, okay, this one seems the most kind of strong and most interesting. And then we started to design, because then we knew actually with what material, with what construction element we could start designing or building. There's another element which is interesting to understand how this first project came to exist. There was no contract at all. We were not insured at all. There was no kind of entity which would kind of save us, let's say, if there were problems. This was actually a team of people, workers, craftsmen, which all together tried to make this happen. Also because we were not able to back ourselves up with norms or anything else. And within that, my biggest teacher right after graduation, this is a project of, I think, 12 years ago, was the foreman and the craftsman. I learned from him what I could never imagine learning from any teacher. It was really the understanding of material, the understanding of the texture of things, of the resources that are in hand, because he always worked in that region. He knew exactly where to find stones, because he understood the geological layers almost, and he knew these are hills and clay goes down in the valleys, and you have rocks which become exposed, and these rocks are interesting to use for the kind of parts of your building that you need to kind of reinforce against water, and so on and so on. So there was a kind of, it was my best teacher. And now actually I would like to show you the construction video. So I don't know if at the back at the technical space, it's, no, yes. And you can put out the sound, because without the sound, yes, perfect. Thank you so much. I like to show this one because afterwards there's another key project which has a similar video, and it is for us, this whole kind of construction process was so enriching. We had an enormous amount of people on the site working, because when we arrived as well, we had a kind of catalog of materials which we got from school, which were not at all possible to buy there. And so using the material on the site, and actually first of all designing kind of a production. So the building site, before it became a construction site, it was a production site. So the material earth was sieved, the smaller particles were used for the blocks, the bigger particles were used later on for the squares. There was a whole storage unit on the site in order to dry these blocks to cure them actually during 2 to 3 weeks. So you start understanding a construction or a building first through a kind of process of production, rather than buying your materials straight away and building with it. So we got quite close to the resources with this project. And I think the elements we learned from these projects or from this one were things we afterwards tried to implement in Belgium, actually, because you have to imagine this was our first project. So we knew nothing else but this way of working. Here you can see, so the building itself had a kind of, was completely with the compressed earth blocks. It has some reinforcements in certain columns due to the kind of earthquake resistancy. And then it was just earth mortar. The wood as well was cut on site from the place we were going to construct. This was done in advance, like 6 months in advance, in order to dry at least as much as possible. And this was for us quite an eye-opener. The same with the kind of sizzle. So the sizzle, we worked together with a hunter who kind of explained to some workers how to make from the sizzle cactus a rope, how to knot this rope together in order to make a kind of large hammock, and how to place that hammock later on within the library. So you had all these stories which were starting always from the resource. They were very afraid on that big hammock, I have to say. So yeah, this is one of these kind of it's the first project, but as well a kind of key projects for the whole kind of development of the ideas and visions. You could go back to the presentation. Now I don't know in this one, which is the next. This is a second key project. So before you saw Burundi, for us was an eye-opener. We learned enormously a lot, but also just how to be more than just an architect and to be part of an architectural project within much more phases. We came back to Belgium. We did the competition. I think it was like 2-3 years later. It was was in the region of Antwerp. It's a kind of external classroom for schools when they teach the kids about biology and so on. They sometimes have a classroom which is in a park, which is in a green area. So we won this competition. This is the new presentation now. I changed again. So we won this competition, and we had won it with a building which was made in bricks. It was completely load-bearing. And in the competition, we always said it was with fired bricks, because at the time we thought it was strategically interesting, because if we would come up with the idea, we would use kind of compressed earth blocks, they would never kind of make us win, because it would be like, okay, no, you're not going to risk this with us. So once we won it, we started to kind of slightly get and introduce the idea of using really local soils. The region of Antwerp and Flanders in general, there are many in geological formation, many rivers of very good clay. And just a few kilometers far from the site, there's this kind of a quarry from Winneberg. And we started to introduce this idea of using the local soil. But this meant for us, how do we normalize and how do we prescribe a material which is locally sourced and which is not on the market? So first of all, it meant for us to create a protocol meaning that we would do a similar kind of testing, we got all the resources of the region, we got sands, we got broken gravels, we got the clay, and we kind of created the matrix of us different kind of mixes in order to these test as well. This time it was not with our own wooden made toy, but it was at the laboratory in a university in which you got kind of official results. And here you could see the system. So it was a complete load-bearing element, which was then duplicated in a kind of connection of spaces, of classrooms. And all around there was this kind of hempcrete insulation. It was as simple as that because it was standing also in an existing hall, which we decided to keep. And another element which so there was this part of kind of, okay, we need to kind of create a protocol of a locally sourced material. But secondly, we didn't find actually masons who were kind of able to estimate the time it would take. One, because it was quite, they were just not feeling comfortable with the fact of using a compressed earth block, which they never used to, but also because we couldn't find masons who did really load-bearing brickwork still, because nowadays, of course, these are all reinforced. The same happened with the engineer we worked with. He was not really feeling comfortable with the idea. For the engineer, we got a historical professor in architectural theory to help him out, to explain a bit how this works, like in the Middle Ages. And another thing is we contacted the contractor in order to create a prototype which would enable us to kind of, okay, understand the timing that he would need. And for the engineer as well to actually just test it out if it really stands. A very simple thing, but it meant us not being behind the computer drawing arches, but it meant us making the blocks and creating a different process in order to kind of reassure everybody that this actually also works in Belgium. So we had done all that, and then the next step was we can estimate our arches. And estimation went times 10, of course, because in Burundi, it's interesting to use these materials because it's labor intensive. Labor on their economical market is quite low. Materials are quite expensive. So there it has a kind of also economical logic. In Belgium, it has no economical logic at all. It's completely against the principles of our system. So we needed to come up with another solution, which meant building or producing all the blocks with workshops, because also it was a kind of new, I mean, this is project 6-7 years ago. This is material or stuff that is done back in the 60s. What is happening now, it's the same but different situation, because also in the 60s, these kind of systems came up. But so to produce all the blocks, we organized a 4-week workshop, and we produced with participants 20,000 blocks, which we then sold for a symbolic €1 to the contractor who is going to mason it. Oh, I'm going back. And so not only the compressed earth blocks were a problem, but also the hempcrete was an issue, because it's again also quite a labor intensive material, and also not very kind of at the time not very used by many contractors. So you have maybe 1, 2, and also for that kind of whole insulation construction, we kind of used a 2-day workshop during kind of 4 weeks, so small 2-day workshops to kind of implement. And of course, these workshops, you have a kind of very heavy duty and very hard labor, but they're mixed with lectures. We invited other people to explain about these kind of materials. And then there's another video, and I think it's nice to see the two next to each other, because it's the same, but it's different. You can also exactly put off the so here you can see the park where it's located in. I think you might start to see the large hall. So the thing is that the hall is becoming a botanical garden, and you have this kind of construction which is set within its walls. Thus we took on parts of the execution for a public project under the contractor. This meant that we had to rent equipment, we had to bring in all the material, we had to sieve it large. This is the first days of the workshop in which the students got to learn the machines and so on. The machine is hydraulic presses, of course, a different type than a manual press, which was used in Burundi. And here you can see the kind of production line, which was set up also on the construction site. So we brought in the resources and we produced all of them on site. And there's a kind of protocol we had to write out for the client and for the engineers. So each, I don't remember the exact amount, each 100 blocks, one had to be taken out in order to ensure kind of quality of this material, because it's not bought in a kind of shop where you have the tag, and if it breaks, you can go back to the producer or whoever, and so on. So these were the kind of lectures, and I think then these blocks were given to the contractor, which started to then mason within. And again, to do all this stuff, there's kind of the need of working with the team, having a good relation with the contractor, because everybody is taking risk. Everybody here is experimenting, and nobody really, I mean, there was an issue, for example, with the engineer didn't count that there's still an amount of water in the block that has to dry. So at certain moments, the archer was starting to kind of get a bit too low than was meant. This is the workshop for the hempcrete, which was set up. Hempcrete being a combination of hemp fibers and lime, which is it has quite a good insulating value. Of course, not like the best chemical insulation materials. And so also the whole roof kind of was the first time to test it out. So the whole roof was rammed and kind of insulated. So it's a very simple system. The reason why these projects are also so simple is that at the beginning we knew already we had to kind of do this within workshop system. So we needed to make a building which was very simple, readable, not too complex, not too many technical super difficult details. And so I think it's really nice to see these two projects next to each other. Maybe I think if I have 40 minutes, this might be enough. Yeah, you can go back to the presentation. Thank you so much. I was to her. Thank you for sharing the video. So no, at the end it was a marvelous construction, and these blocks were at the end sponged because to get a kind of a different texture. I go further with this project. So there are two things. Maybe because in the update, don't look. Yes. I'm gonna jump to this because this happened after this, and it makes a logic in the story. Workshops, okay. How can we upscale? Because the workshop is not the solution to kind of let's build all of our public buildings with biosourced and geosourced material in workshop types. I mean, we can keep building 50 square meter pavilions then. So the next step was to understand, okay, it works brilliantly, people are very happy, but how can we start to kind of upscale and make this also possible for other people, other architects more exactly, to use it? And there came the idea of BC materials. Because in the city of Brussels, where we worked, there's a certain amount of excavated earth, which is dumped, which has the perfect kind of properties to be actually implemented in construction. There's sand, there's very high quality sand. There's a very beautiful clay river. If you go quite deep, you get and stumble up a very good clay. This is reached once, not if you make just your cellar, but if you make a parking lot or if you go deeper, the metro. But you have also a lot of demolition waste, which can be concrete, for example, which is granulated, is very interesting as gravel. And so basically we started to develop, this is a section of Brussels where you kind of see the different resources which are available under the city. And so in Belgium, for example, there's 37 million tons of earth excavated a year, only in Belgium. It's approximately 1,002,000 trucks. The extraction usually is transported to a temporary site, and then sometimes we send it to fill in some gaps in the landscape of Flanders or Wallonia. But it's not used to kind of to its quality. So with BC materials, we tried and then to hack ourselves within the system and to produce building materials for to produce actually mixes for contractors straight away on the extraction site or at the production hall. This meant so we had done, it took us, and it's still, we're researching all the different types of materials which are makeable with the excavations of Brussels. And we've got these three main products, which went through the whole stages of kind of normalizing, regulation, and so on and so on. And these can be bought at the cooperative, and you have the briquette, which is a kind of compressed earth block. You have Brüssel, which is plasters, earth plasters. We've got them in 5 colors if you want. We have the Castarmich, which is a rammed earth mix. So we're not executing anymore because it doesn't make sense, but we're preparing and developing mixes so that contractors can use them or so that architects can prescribe them. And a certain amount of buildings in Belgium in which the materials have been used or we've been linked to them for consultancy in order to upscale this whole kind of vision. In Bokreek and many more and many more. And so the moment came, we have to build our own production facility because the amounts became bigger and bigger. Of course, we have architects, so they designed the production facility. We have some people with our handy, so they build it themselves, and we got a site for 5 years. So we had to invest ourselves. So our whole building is also demountable because we know we might have to move in a few years. So these are like these large concrete blocks, third-hand construction blocks that you just stack on top of each other. And the whole roof is actually fixed with, I don't know, how do you say that in English? You know, of the trucks, you have which they close their truck with. Let's assume you understood. And so that holds the kind of whole roof to the wall. And what happened, and that is when BC studies also made more and more sense, is that we got visits of schools, of universities to follow courses, to follow workshops within the production hall, because suddenly we had all our equipment that was ready and we had architects calling us to develop prototypes for them. And so within our construction hall, at a certain moment, we had these situations in which we had groups of 50 students coming in, trying to understand how the material works. And there was a whole work which started for us as well, is sensibilizing students, but also young architects, construction workers. We organize workshops now for construction workers at their sites. And in order to kind of make sure that what we also develop is also usable on the market. Now, the next step is to be able to kind of also make sure that the prices get on the market, because still that's the kind of next step to kind of make and understand how this is also kind of viable for larger scale projects. A very last, right? Now I have to go back. Maybe I want to end with one project, which is it's this one. Don't look. Which is in the south of France, which we started. And so for us, this is kind of a bullseye project in the sense that we have puzzled a bit our three entities. And suddenly we got this commission from the Luma Foundation, which has a chapter in Arles, which is as well called Atelier Luma, to kind of build, and we made it renovate, their new workshops, laboratories, where they develop new materials from the resources of the Camargue. So for us, a kind of dream client, which was kind of researching the same thing. And so we started this project on a very thorough research, which is already done by Atelier Luma. And by the way, this project we do together with Assemble Studio from London, to map out all the resources first. And not only the resources, but also all the contractors, associations, which are linked to construction. And the first days we did the same, but we went more precisely, understanding there's a quarry, there's quarry waste, there's a kind of white powder that is, when they cut the stones, the limestone quarries in the south of France, there's this kind of powder, which is a waste, which is quite interesting. The same, there's sand quarries where they wash the sand because they sell the sand, but they wash them. And in the waste system, there's quite a kind of clay soil that is left. And with these first kind of inputs, we started again kind of understanding what were the possibilities of the local resources we had. And doing so, we organized our work not as a kind of a typical commission in which you work and develop, but we worked in residencies because we wanted to have a very close collaboration with the client and also working with Assemble from London. So each time we came 1 full month with the whole team on site, and we worked on models, on samples, on prototyping with the whole team. So there was a kind of complete different way of experimenting and looking at the building as a research on itself. The building was a prototype, the building was a research. And from samples, the models became bigger, and they became more concrete in the sense that we developed a kind of ramped earth that was very specific to the site, reusing the white powder of the quarry. So we got this beautiful white ramped earth. You're reusing the gravels, of course, from the demolition of the site. And so again, these kind of lab tests, creating protocols for the construction, and the same with, and the machines get each year bigger and bigger, I tell you. It's like this machine is kind of, and it was an interesting question about digitalizing, because these are new machines being developed in Toulouse in France, in which is mechanization and palletization is included in the process of making these kind of blocks. But also plasters, in which the plasters were using algae in place of clay, because dried algae has similar kind of properties as clay. It's an ancient plastering system coming from Japan and Korea. And so developing actually our whole set of materials, which then from sampling go on to prototyping again. Prototyping the wood, we were working with kind of clay-based oils, and it's a super interesting project because it really tries to define, and it's pure experimentation. It goes quite far in that, and but also is looking at the building as a mine itself. So the tiles are reused, of course, cleaned. The broken tiles are reused in kind of decorative terrazzos, but the tiles are all used in the exterior render. The whole building is insulated with rice straw, because there's enormous amount of rice being in Camargue being used. And so next to that, you create this kind of content around the buildings before even starting. And so with BC Studies and Atelier Luma, there's a whole kind of trajectory in which you have chantier d'insertion, in which contractors are actually coming to test out material and building the prototypes, workshop and seminars. So we're starting to rearrange even the kind of way of contracting and seeing if people can learn from other people. And this means that our plan becomes almost a plan of prototypes, a plan of studies and of researches. So this is a kind of bullseye in which the three entities are able to kind of take out elements, take them further, and in order not to kind of come with solutions, but to kind of test out the possibilities and to incite other people to kind of look further than a typical architectural company. I had taken it out because I cannot show it yet. Okay, but this is kind of the final of the part of the lecture in which you kind of understand the reasoning why these three entities are there. Because as a practice trying to go beyond the concrete, in our case, we're going in such a direction that we need to even formulate, work with legislations, trying to make sure that these kind of materials which we implement have a kind of, can be applied not only by us, but by other people. So yeah, that's a bit it.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. You were talking about eye-opening projects, and I'm sure all these projects are really for us architects in Switzerland really eye-opening. So thank you so much. Are there any questions? Okay, then we go on with the next.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a little question. In the last product, you told this line of the machines getting bigger and bigger. And I'm really interested because in the first project, it was really labor intensive. And so you couldn't use any electricity or other things, and in the end it's in Europe again, you just cut the labor out and do it with machines, and in the end it's, I think, in a good way, but at the end it's the same like in the 60s and 70s. So do you think the process goes further, and then we are at some time or some point in the time at the same point that we yet are? Or can we change something, or is it just we have a broken system of cost and labor, or is that what we should change? Or
it's a very good question, which I sadly enough have no answer to, but it's completely correct in the sense, of course, there's a kind of economical market which currently dictates a certain direction, which I think indeed what is happening now is similar to what happened in the 60s. But I think what we're trying now a bit to see, and I think it's not the solution, but it's like the way the company itself is structured. So it's a cooperative. It gives it has a different status. It's true that nowadays to get the kind of prices of these materials, in our case lower, it's by having bigger commands. I mean, if I make one stone, or I make 100,000 stones, it's a big difference. And to indeed see and look and search for an efficiency. If efficiency means indeed, how you say, like less labor, I don't know if that is I mean, I am also not sure if that's a solution, but I think there's a kind of whole set of elements which have to be looked at to kind of define different ways in which this can go on. And it goes back to the kind of principles of growth which our system has, which kind of incites a kind of continuous growth, how to work against that. I think on a higher level, a lot of things have to happen in order for, on a lower level, to kind of as well have different futures for these kind of productions and companies.
Thank you so much for your lecture. I found it really inspiring. And I think I understood the three entities that you also stressed, which in itself seems also circular. But somehow a question pops up in my mind, which is, why do you not see everything as a holistic thing and kind of also to the outside represented as one? Is this out of logistic issues? Is it out of conceptual? How does that?
No, the way how we present ourselves is always as BC,
Yes.
which has three entities, and that's out of legal status.
Yes,
We
okay.
cannot, as architect, be
Yeah.
sell materials. So there's a kind of, on legislative level, a kind of need of separating.
Mhm.
And I think also reason by, for example, the whole education and workshops and so on, it cannot go in the logic of a company, which is something which you need to earn. So for us, the education is something we don't want to earn with. It's a break-even kind of system in which we work with subsidies. So therefore, the logic of the association. But to the outside, we are, and also the people working within BC, it's not so strict. There's overlap.
Yeah. Okay,
So.
thank you.
So when I see this, I wish, why is there not more of it? So I wonder, like, what do you see are the main hurdles for this type of material to be used in a larger scale, like on a political level or legal level? And also, what are the maybe limitations in like types of buildings or types of usage?
Oh, there's many answers. I mean, not many. The answer is multifaceted in the sense, yes, the material has its restrictions. In terms of if you, I think there was one of the students saying, like, if you have building, you have a D, it doesn't fit in, well, you demolish the building. Same with these materials. If you have an idea and you want to use that building, then you might have to adapt your building because the material you just chose is not able to function within your design. So that's definitely a restriction, is as well the kind of place you are. I don't think, I mean, concrete is the Rolls Royce of the materials, but if I go to the bakery around the corner, I go with the bike, not with the Rolls Royce. So there's a certain moment you decide I'm going to use concrete, because for kind of structures that are going to stay for 100, 200 years, there's a logic in putting so much energy in that. But for things like plasters, earth plaster is so interesting because tendencies change. I mean, you like today brown, to next year red, you're gonna change it, so there's a kind of, also within the choice of materials, there's a kind of durability, not only linked to the material itself and maintenance, but also where it is used within a building. It's linked to climate, I mean, to bioregions. There are places on Earth where this material has a complete logic. There's other places in the Earth with different climates where Earth on itself is not relevant. In the material today, there's lobby, of course. There's an enormous concrete lobby in order to kind of keep, of course, this material within the construction. And there's the fact that still until today, we have German regulations, which are very good. There are French regulations, very good. Using earth from a shop, you can buy it perfectly to do a ramped earth mix, but you might end up doing a ramped earth mix, ramped earth wall, for example, in Toulouse with earth from Germany where they sell it. So there also suddenly it's like, why? And it doesn't make sense. So therefore, using locally sourced materials, which are each time different, there's no kind of industrialization in the process of achieving them. So there's a lot of things that and it takes time. I think if there's a volonté, if there's a kind of a vision also on political level, these things should not be problems, or they can be solved. There's ways to kind of go around them. But of course, everybody has to have his nose in the right direction. And I think therefore the projects or the BC as an office works today because there's still so much research and experiment, but maybe in the future, such a kind of hybrid system doesn't make sense anymore. I don't know.
Thank you so much. Maybe there's a certain coherence with what you just said, but I was just wondering about how can we raise more awareness to in general, now you've talked a lot about brick and concrete, and how could we overcome those steps with other locally sourced materials? Like if we approach a new construction site, how can we raise a certain awareness about more sorts of materials besides brick and clay or concrete? For example, wood, in the first project that you've shown, you were talking about, you've also seen that you've used the local sourced wood, and how can we apply those things? Because at the moment, I feel like we import a lot of products I don't know, wood from the tropics or tropical areas and things like that. And how can we overcome or get back to use the local resources?
I think it starts also really with you, because you're the architects prescribing those materials. So if you wouldn't be prescribing, no, but it's a multi-leveled answer in terms, it's you who will prescribe materials in the future. You will design with certain materials. So it's up to you to kind of choose your materials wisely then, and look around your region before you kind of randomly kind of start with the material coming from several countries further. So that's the first step. A second step is on political level. It have to be able to, the whole work of Rotor also, and kind of how to prescribe reused materials. It's work that it's very tedious, very consuming, but very relevant in order to make these things possible. And it goes together on political level to kind of different taxation system and so on. So everybody, there's little things that everybody has to do. But definitely what you can do is already understanding these new materials and designing with them rather than designing straight away from a conceptual point of view, crazy structures, but maybe looking first what there's logic to use, and starting from then, your building also has a structural logic.